Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Greenfader. I'm managing partner AG&T here in Miami, Florida. We are real estate developers and advisors. And this is the first part of our thought leadership program. And today we're going to be talking about bringing manufacturing back to the United States and specifically bringing it back to Puerto Rico. And I'm honored to have Luis Fortuño, who is a partner at Steptoe and Johnson with us, who can really shed a lot of light on this topic. We've spoken in the past about it, and I think he has a lot to share. So, Luis, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Adam, thank you. I certainly appreciate this opportunity. As you mentioned, I'm a partner in the DC office of Steptoe and Johnson. I've been a corporate partner there for this is my 8th year. I was a corporate partner in a couple of law firms in Puerto Rico at the beginning of my law practice back in the mid to late 80s and 90s. Then I served representing Puerto Rico. I served in Congress for 4 years, and then I served as governor of Puerto Rico for 4 years as well.
So you have a really an interesting background both in the private sector and in the public sector. And so I guess I wanted to open up the conversation with what everybody's talking about today is bringing manufacturing back to the United States. Do you think that this is something that's going to happen, that's important, that we should be doing?
Well, I believe there's a strong movement in Congress right now to do exactly that. If the pandemic that is affecting us and has affected the whole globe at this moment has shown us is that in the case of the U.S., contrary to what used to be the case, we no longer manufacture most of our biopharmaceutical products, medical devices, medical equipment. They have left the U.S., whether we're talking about the U.S. states or territories. And many of them have gone to China, but they have gone to other countries as well. And now the country has seen itself in a tight spot trying to access all of these products and not having as much control as it used to over that production.
Yeah, it seems like this is a big concern, and then perhaps if we do bring this back, manufacturing back to the United States, what everybody's talking about is that Puerto Rico for so many years was a manufacturing powerhouse, and I guess the question that everybody's asking is can Puerto Rico play a role, do you think, in bringing manufacturing back and be able to facilitate manufacturing in the United States?
Well, I certainly hope so. To begin with, after so many decades of having a very strong medical device, pharmaceutical, biopharma production in Puerto Rico, we trained and developed a local cadre of professionals in so many different areas that have actually a unique expertise in this space, and you rarely find in a place as small as Puerto Rico so many trained professionals that can actually hit the ground running, know what you need to do at the highest level in terms of anything from clean rooms to you name it, nanotechnology and so on and so forth. In addition to that, we have, because of that, our engineering schools and other schools developed very strong programs to train those professionals as well. The fact that Puerto Rico is part of the United States, I believe it's extremely important. And even though the cost of operations in Puerto Rico is higher than perhaps in some of the poorer countries around the world, it is still a lower cost as compared to the U.S. mainland. So there are some competitive advantages that are natural to the island at this moment.
So you mentioned, just for people that might not be clear, Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Are Puerto Ricans American citizens?
Yes, since 1917. Actually, We were granted U.S. citizenship, and in the 40s, from the 40s on, we are natural-born citizens. Which means, by the way, that in a sidebar here, as you know, in the defense manufacturing and development industry, you can only hire U.S. citizens. So that's another advantage that Puerto Rico has also in that space as well.
So it's not like we would be bringing our manufacturing to some foreign country, but everybody who would be working who is Puerto Rican is an American, and we would be able to have sensitive manufacturing in Puerto Rico, military, pharmaceutical, anything that would be required to be in the United States.
Precisely, and you mentioned that Puerto Ricans, we are U.S. citizens by birth. Actually, not only that, but we have proven throughout the years with over 220,000 Americans of Puerto Rican descent that have served in our military with valor and courage. So again, it's something that's ingrained in a vast majority of people that are born and raised in Puerto Rico, and it's a natural for us.
Well, I had the honor of living 25 years in Puerto Rico. My wife is Puerto Rican. My kids are Puerto Rico. We're born in Puerto Rico and raised. And I really had the opportunity of seeing the island, from coast to coast, and have really been surprised by the proliferation of manufacturing in Puerto Rico. I mean, every small municipality had something to do with manufacturing. Can you explain a little bit about the extent of that impact?
Well, certainly. This actually commenced in the 40s with what was called Operation Bootstrap. At that time, Puerto Rico was mainly an agricultural economy, and there was a transition into a strong manufacturing sector that, with time, the passing of time, became the mainstay of the island's economy. And at the beginning, it was mostly labor intensive. But again, with the passing of time, a higher level of education, and then starting in 1976 on, with very attractive tax incentives that the U.S. Congress approved, that blossomed into truly high-tech manufacturing for, again, pharmaceutical, chemical, medical devices, products, and related products.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that Puerto Rico has a long tradition of manufacturing, dating back to the early 1900s and really culminating in 1976 with, I believe that was called the 936 tax incentive.
Yes, that's a section of the Internal Revenue Code that actually is Section 936. That's no longer in the books, but that's what it was called back in 76 when it was first approved by Congress.
And so when you drive by, throughout the island of Puerto Rico and you see multiple manufacturing plants in each municipality, was that a government mandate where manufacturing was purposely spread out throughout the island, or that happen naturally?
No, actually, there was an intent to do that, and actually there were also local incentives that were provided that encouraged some of these companies to, there were some local taxes that these companies would pay, and they were lower in certain municipalities to try to spread throughout the island these operations. So that's partly why you've seen this. As part of this effort, basic infrastructure was developed throughout the island, so you had good road access, telecommunications, power, water, and so on and so forth. So it served a dual purpose during that period of time.
Yeah, you hear that a lot today, especially the DMO, Brad Dean, who presides the Destination Marketing Organization, wanting to bring tourists and other business throughout the island. So it seems like a natural that we have this infrastructure in place already, throughout Puerto Rico. That it seems like it'd be pretty easy to, to start that up again. Now, I understand that during Operation Bootstrap, Puerto Rico's economic growth was significant. It worked, right? That the growth was very strong. So I guess it did have a positive impact for Puerto Rico manufacturing?
Definitely. And actually, during that period of time, I'm talking from the 40s on until probably the 80s, you saw that the economy in Puerto Rico was growing at a much faster pace than our neighbors, but also faster pace than the U.S. mainland. And Puerto Rico was closing that gap with its sister states across the nation. So that also occurred as a result of this.
So we've seen results from the program. It's a long-standing program. It affected the island, in all areas of the island. So it seems like it was very successful. And I guess you mentioned, besides the great infrastructure that Puerto Rico already has, you talked about the workforce. And something that we have really always talked about is that the workforce in Puerto Rico is highly educated and has a very specific skill set in manufacturing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, as we were discussing earlier, indeed, this was a natural that evolved with the passing of time. The local universities actually were partners in this effort to train our engineers, chemists, and other professionals so that they can immediately slide into the labor force with high-paying jobs, and many of them eventually ended up working for these companies for their whole career, moving around the world, and oftentimes also, being in charge of major operations in other countries, or in charge of the development and construction of some of these facilities, because that also entailed local construction companies that developed the expertise to actually build what's required at this very high end level for this type of manufacturing operation. So that also occurred, and at the same time also there were many local companies that were suppliers to these companies as well. So again, this helped develop a whole slew of local companies and operators that were there in support of all of these operations.
Yeah, I remember we were home builders and building a lot of single-family homes, especially for first-time buyers in the early '90s. And I remember having, new communities filled with individuals, young 20-somethings just getting married and being able to afford their first home, basically because they were working in manufacturing plants. And I remember at the time, this was '93, that individuals working in the plants were making $14, $15 an hour. And I think there was nothing better than to see these young couples be able to buy their own home and then get married, which was a very interesting part of the Puerto Rican culture, that they needed to have the home before they would go ahead and ask for the hand in marriage. But they were great times.
Yes, home ownership, as you know, in the Hispanic community is an ingrained value among others. So what you saw was precisely part of that.
Yeah, it was great. And the University of Mayagüez RUM has been, RUM is the acronym, has been known to be one of the top engineering universities in the United States, if not the world, correct?
That is true. Actually, to this day, fully 1/3 of its graduates are actually hired right out of school by NASA and top-notch companies. So that is something that actually is still in place and could assist in making sure that should legislation bringing back to the U.S. These operations be approved, that Puerto Rico could be part of that process in a very strong way.
It's I think something that a lot of people get when they come to Puerto Rico is obviously beautiful beaches, great infrastructure, nice people. but something that sometimes might go unnoticed is that the efficiency of the Puerto Rican worker has in many cases exceeded that efficiency of other locations. My wife, in fact, did a study comparing a Hewlett-Packard plant in San Francisco with a Hewlett-Packard plant in Puerto Rico. And one of the very interesting findings of the study was that because the workers, the managers, the plant operators, and everybody else in Puerto Rico were Puerto Ricans, the efficiency in the same Hewlett-Packard plant was significantly lower in San Francisco, where you had a diversity of workers. You might have different ethnicities and whatnot. So I think that that's also another advantage. I mean, everybody who really lives in Puerto Rico is Puerto Rican. They speak the same language. They understand the same jokes. They've got the same cultural habits. So it's a great advantage. So we've talked about having a good infrastructure, having a strong labor pool. What other advantages, if any, do you see of Puerto Rico for bringing manufacturing back to the United States?
Well, you were just talking about some of the values that are shared by our labor force. Something that I have noticed also and has been brought up to my attention by people from outside the island is that workers in Puerto Rico tend to be quite loyal to their employer, to the company, and that is extremely important. The work ethic is something that also that has been brought up to my attention. And then it's interesting, we were talking earlier about the University of Puerto Rico Engineering School in Mayagüez. I remember one company CEO who was actually expanding a plant down there. We were visiting with the employees, and when we were done, the comment was, we love our employees. You have a very strong labor force, impeccable work ethic, but I don't know what you do in training your engineers. The CEO told me, but they are wired differently. We don't get this quality of engineers anywhere else in the world for the type of work we do.
Oh, that must have been really nice to hear. I think it's probably a combination of the Cuba Libres and the culture. But
perhaps.
So I guess looking at this really wonderful base that Puerto Rico seems that it has, from an investment perspective today, walk us through a little bit about what happened, because Puerto Rico is currently not manufacturing at the rate that it was 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, it is still. I mean, it still has a strong manufacturing base, but nothing like what it used to be. Now, the way I see it is that there was a confluence of events that coincided at the same time in the 90s. First, in the 90s, we see a strong globalization effort. The Soviet Union had disappeared. The European Union was growing. We were head first into the Chinese market, and you may recall that the first major multinational trade agreement that was approved at that time was NAFTA, which created the North American free trade zone with Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. And actually, that brought some operations to the northern border, on the Mexican side, northern border with the U.S. But that globalization efforts continued. New trade agreements were entered into with different countries, and then countries, as a result of this, started competing among other things, not just with grants and incentives, but also with their tax structure. And while all of that was happening, and generated a lot more competition in this area, the U.S. Congress decided in 1996, with an amendment to a tax bill that was being approved at the time, to eliminate the Section 936, which was that incentive that had been in place. and it really did not substitute it with anything else, because codes change, and that's fine, but did not look into what could happen down the road, not just to the local economy, but to the all of these companies moving out of the U.S. soil to manufacture these products outside the U.S.
So I guess it was a repeal without a replace.
Yes, and again, and I insist also on the globalization effort that was ongoing. So many things were coincided at the same time. And then Puerto Rico had been in a very a strong position. You could argue historically, and there was also some blame on the part of Puerto Rico that needed to react perhaps more aggressively to what was going on around, not just with NAFTA, but with other trade agreements and other moves that were occurring around the world.
And just for people who might not know, Puerto Ricans don't have senators and congressmen, correct?
Exactly. Well, it only has one representative in Congress. That person can only vote in the committees, but not on the floor on final passage of bills.
Okay. So, everyone's heard about Puerto Rico and its debt and the bankruptcy and the crisis. Obviously, the hurricanes that have been so devastating, and then the earthquakes that
Can we
happened.
take one break 1 second?
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry.
So we're back here with Luis Fortuño, partner Steptoe and Johnson, and good to have you back.
Thank you.
So before the break, we were talking about really all the unfortunate circumstances that happened to Puerto Rico after 936 was repealed. Puerto Rico went into major economic troubles and problems. Many say that it was a result of losing a lot of that manufacturing. And then that kind of then after the economic problems, Puerto Rico faced hurricanes and had massive destruction to the infrastructure, the electrical grid, as well as the morale of the people. And then this year, 2019, last year, Puerto Rico then had hurricanes. So the island has just been ravaged and continues to be ravaged, and there's a lot of pain going on. And it just kind of seems like a logical conclusion, a win-win-win, if you'd like, for manufacturing to come back to the island. I mean, what do you think?
Well, what these years have proven is the resiliency of the local business community on the one hand, and the workers on the other hand as well. And the fact that so many people really want to roll up their sleeves and do whatever it takes to get the economy growing at the pace that it was growing before actually is proof of that, certainly. But these have been trying moments, certainly. So
I guess that in 2017, the Tax Act was passed, and apparently to just make troubles even worse, this puts Puerto Rico in a very delicate tax situation. Can you explain what the 2017 Tax Act did, and then specifically that the GILTI, GILTI provision?
Sure. In 2017, as you know, the Trump administration and Congress approved a new tax reform with the intent, among other things, to bring back businesses to the U.S. and actually corporate rates for income tax came down significantly. In the same time, actually, this had to be paid for somehow, among other things. Plus, I think there was a policy, an intent to also try to entice companies to come back to the United States. And what's called the global intangible low-taxed income was imposed on these companies on profits. Profits become subject to U.S. corporate rates once they, back then, under the previous code. Once the profits were distributed back to the owner or the shareholders, But under this guilty structure, any profits that exceed 10% of the company's hard assets actually will be subject to a much higher U.S. corporate rate, whether dividends are sent back to the mainland or not. So before, many of those profits were kept outside the U.S. mainland. Actually, some of them we even deposited in banks in Puerto Rico, which had other effects in the economy, local economy. But all that is gone, and there's a new tax structure under which whatever people might want to do going forward has to be built upon that.
So for those that haven't been following closely Puerto Rico tax history, Puerto Rico is still considered a foreign jurisdiction. Is that correct?
Yes, for tax purposes, income derived from operations in Puerto Rico is foreign source income, indeed. So it falls under a separate section, and this guilty income tax, minimum tax, is imposed on those benefits profits that are derived from operations anywhere outside the U.S. mainland, including Puerto Rico, which means that actually not only that Puerto Rico, lose some of its attractiveness with the elimination of the tax incentives that have been put in place, plus the globalization efforts and the trade agreements that make actually Puerto Rico before used to have unique access to the U.S. mainland market with no quotas. When globalization hit the world, then our, shall we say, we had this market cornered in Puerto Rico that's gone. So with all of that happening, and then on top of that now, we are at a disadvantage because of the guilty tax.
So, I guess looking forward in this new age that we're living in, and we can call it, World 2.0, or where we are as a world going to make changes, and I think each country individually is going to take actions to protect itself. What has to happen for Puerto Rico to regain and maybe even improve its status as a manufacturing leader?
Well, there is already more than one piece of legislation that has been filed to try to bring back all the this manufacturing in this space, specifically biopharma, pharmaceuticals, medical devices. Senators Marco Rubio on the one hand and Senator Coons on the other. Even Puerto Rico's representative in Congress, Jennifer Gonzalez, filed a bipartisan bill along those lines. So there is momentum to do something to bring back to America the manufacturing of these products. What needs to happen is, number one, that the Tax Reform Act of 2017 be amended along these lines, and secondly, once that happens, that at the very least that Puerto Rico be included so that it can partake in this effort. And given what we talked about at the beginning of all these attractive elements of operating in Puerto Rico, hopefully that will generate new economic activity on the island in this area.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Luis, and I know this is an extremely important topic for a lot of people. We will have definitely more conversations in the future on this, and you're always invited and welcome, and really hope that together we can get through this, and I know that this too shall pass. Indeed, and certainly we all hope that to go back to our regular lives after what we have been going through, and hopefully as a result of that, as a country, as a nation, we will be able to look back and say, we didn't think of certain things, just like what we were discussing. Let's make sure that those products are made in America
to the extent that that's possible, and hopefully Puerto Rico can be part of that effort.
That's wonderful. Well, great. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
joining
Adam.
us, and have a great afternoon.
Take care. Stay safe, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Take care.